All right, guys. Thank you for joining me for a new episode of the podcast. For right now, we're just going to call it Andrew Cooperrider because I don't know what to call it, but that's okay. We haven't done a podcast in quite some time. So, welcome to the Andrew Cooperrider podcast. And we're going to go through a couple of topics today. If you noticed, I've lost weight since we last talked through the campaign. Since January, I've actually lost over 50 pounds, and I plan to keep losing. So there you go, guys. We'll work on that. But let's see here. We've got a couple of different topics we're going to cover. We're going to cover election stuff, election day stuff, election coverage, talk about some different stories from election day. Not really spend a whole lot of time on my election. You're welcome to reach out to me if you want to talk to me about that, but we'll dig into some of the election day stuff. We will talk about obviously counties involving my election because there were some interesting happenings. We'll talk about the lawsuit with Fayette and Clerk Blevins. We also will have a nice and interesting story here. I don't think anybody else has really covered it. Something going on in Frankfort regarding tax dollars being spent to harass GOP members. And then, of course, we'll hit upon the newest concern that I think Biden's standing on to help he really ends up getting it done and bringing it in. But for right now, if you could help support us, and it's simple, it's easy. You can like, comment, share. If you're watching this on Facebook, on YouTube, you can share that. This is also a podcast available on all major podcasting platforms. And feel free to send that out and share that with people. Tell them to check it out. And let's continue to grow this movement. As you can tell at the ticker at the bottom, you can text Liberty to 33777. Once again, you can text Liberty to 33777 and get updates about one podcast episodes. We'll be doing one a week. Tuesdays in the afternoon, it'll go onto Facebooks and stuff. And then it'll actually be available Tuesday mornings, I believe, on the podcast form. So you get a little bit early if you listen to it in the podcast form. But outside of just knowing when new episodes come out, by texting Liberty to 33777, you're also going to get our calls to action. So if you want to fight, you want to get involved, you want to help pass some legislation, you want to help get this state on the right track, that's one small way you can do it. We'll keep you up to date and tell you how to do it. So please support us, like, comment, share, subscribe if you're on the YouTubes, and let's dig into it, right? So I lost, but Kentucky won. So we were up against quite a lot. Obviously, in my election, last count we were seeing, they were up over 300,000. The final reports, of course, haven't been filed yet to see expenditures. But based on what we were seeing and based upon a couple of people who jumped in there, it is likely they dumped around $400,000 against me from my opponent's side of things. And, it's to be expected, right? Looking back on the election, there's a few things we should have done. We refrained from doing a whole lot of attack ads and things like that. Try to run it as clean as we could. My opponent, not the case. So maybe next time around, who knows? Maybe you go with more attack ads. It appears maybe they work, maybe they don't. Who knows? But there's a lot of things, of course, you can learn from the election. But here's the key. I may have lost my election, but in their obsession with me, because you got to remember, right? This fight is not about us personally. It is about the overall chessboard, right? The neocon, let's spend all your money and help the big corporations versus the free market, liberty people who just want our government to leave us alone. That's kind of what we're up against here. And so as you line that out on the chessboard, there's a lot of different moving pieces. And by moving the way we did and subtracting away so much of the resources and effort, we were able to get some more liberty people in there. Tishner won in the Senate in a primary. All indications, she's a pretty liberty Republican. Jay Williams, also endorsed by Thomas Massie. So indications say he should be a liberty Republican. He was actually in the state Senate in the 90s when he's in the minority. So, we'll see how that turns out. In the House, we've got Ed Massey being taken down by Rawlings. We've got Steve Doan taking down Adam Koenig, and Proctor taking down Sal Santoro. So we've got a couple of major wins there where they're taking down people who are members of leadership or committee heads and definitely making our mark. You also have some other wins across the state. Overall, I think we've over doubled the amount of quote unquote liberty legislators. People ask, what is a liberty Republican? Savannah Maddox had a post about this. Representative Maddox did just the other day and really hit the nail on the head. Liberty Republicans are just Republicans that follow the platform and believe in it. When the Republicans say we're the party of the Constitution, we'll hold you to that. When we say we do not believe in, this is all in the platform, believe in corporate welfare, we're going to hold you to that. When you say you believe that government shouldn't be creating economic opportunities, but can only stifle them, we're going to hold you to that. And that's what we expect you to do. So I may have lost, but Kentucky overall, I think, has come out on top. But there were some interesting issues from Election Day. Now, keep in mind, this is the first time we've had really kind of paper ballots across the board. There's a few places that had that, I think, last election for the special too as well. But this is the first time we've had paper ballots kind of across the board being used, and paper ballots are great. But what we also had was these voting centers, right? So the first issue becomes when you go into somewhere like Lexington for the early voting, which, by the way, early voting is in-person early voting is actually unconstitutional. Our state constitution is very specific about when Election Day is, and voting is to take place on one day. So in order to get around that, the legislators do what legislators do sometimes in the government, where they're all in on it and they create up a term to get around the Constitution, because if they put it up for a referendum for us to actually vote on it, it'd probably fail, because the majority of people only want you to vote in person on one day across the state. And so rather than putting it up for a referendum, they come up with this new term. And so what it's called early, in person, no excuse, absentee voting. It's early voting, but that's what they had to call it for it to be allowed constitutionally. Now, in some of these areas like Jessamine County, like Garrett County, places where voting took place for my election, there's not very many ballot variations. There is ballot variations. You're probably going to end up with, between 10 and 20, depending on some things. But when you go into Fayette County, your ballot variations are huge. So first, you've got ballot variation for Republican, Independent, and Democrat. So that right there is 3 different ballot variations. And then also as well, depending on where you live, you have a different city council, different state house rep, different state senator. So I believe Lexington has several hundred different ballot variations, a very high hundreds amount. And because of that, when they have voting in one place, it's very easy to hand out the wrong ballots. But voting centers were an issue on the general election day for Jessamine County. But in Fayette County, they did early voting all one location. Now, Fayette County had issues. We're going to dig into that because we had to have a lawsuit on the Fayette County clerk, Don Blevins, there on election day. We'll dig into that and some of this. But I want to dig into Jessamine County issues. So there was a big issue going on in Jessamine County. And if there's this Facebook page called What's Happening in Nicholasville or something like that. And if you go to the post about this, somebody posted, said, anybody else get the wrong ballot? Had 150 comments on it. Now, obviously, people could be commenting multiple times, but what is that about? Well, and obviously you have outside of, you need to get the right ballot if you're a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent. And honestly, if you're an independent or Democrat in Jessamine County and you get handed a Republican ballot, you might just keep it, because there wasn't very many Democrat primaries going on in Jessamine County, because there's not many Democrats running. I think there's only one. And so if you actually want to get to vote on things like sheriff and some other things, you actually had to be a registered Republican, because there was no challengers in the generals on the Democrat side. Also as well, in the city, you have city commissioners in the city of Nicholasville that were up for election. And so you had situations of people getting the ballots that had the city commissioners on it that live out in the county, and people that live in the city not having city commissioners on their ballots, on top of some other issues. And that post caught the attention. And there's actually a news story run about this here. About the mix-up by Fox 56.
Ballot mix-ups in Jessamine County that started with a shortage. We spoke with the Jessamine County clerk and deputy clerk. They said poll workers were getting things set up and ready to go by 6 a.m. and did not anticipate the number of voters who turned out. As they began running short on ballots, some voters who lived in the county were accidentally given ballots with the option to vote for Nicholasville city commissioners.
As soon as we were notified that there was a problem, we addressed it immediately. Tommy went straight to a couple of the voting centers and explained to them what they were supposed to be doing. This morning, we had a meeting early this morning addressing this situation, and this fall for the general election, it will not happen again because we're going to do some things totally different.
One thing they plan to do differently is purchase more printers. County Clerk Collier says instead of waiting on ballots to be delivered, they will be able to print the correct ballots directly at the polling places.
All right, so I'm going to read between the lines a little bit here. If I understand what was happening, people would show up they would show up to vote, and and if I'm reading between the lines, okay, you'd show up for your ballot, and if they didn't have enough of the right ballot, they were just handing you the wrong ballot for you to vote on. I'm reading between the lines because that's what made sense. Because if you remember, his fix was, well, we'll just go ahead and we'll drop the printer off. But yeah, I didn't hear a lot of reports about people having to wait for hours on end or a long period of time to get their correct ballot. What I heard going on more than anything was people getting the wrong ballots. So it seems like in Jessamine County, if they didn't have the correct ballot, like if you're missing city commissioners or you're out in the county and they didn't have ballots with just non-city commissioners on it, they just handed you the wrong ballot and said, ballot schmallet. You can go ahead and just vote on this one right here. Reading between the lines, that's what it seems like. Reading the comments going on what's happening mixed with that news story, it seems like in Jessamine County, what they said is if you got the wrong ballot, oopsies, but just go ahead and vote anyways. And the problem is it's really hard to track this. It's hard for you to figure out who was supposed to get it and who wasn't. However, this news story coming from Fox 56 and also as well, the issues going on and what's happening apparently escaped the local journalists who ran the story. Kentucky primary elections lead to impressive voter turnout. First off, turnout was actually a little bit less than it was 4 years ago, according to our numbers, but maybe I'm off. But they say the process went smoothly. Well, apparently Jessamine Journal did not get the message from the county clerk that it did not go so smoothly and people were getting wrong ballots and voting in the wrong places. Here's the deal. Okay. Here's my humblest of opinions. No more voting centers. I think these voting centers are a big, big problem. It used to be you had your precinct assigned. So like when I showed up to vote on election day in Fayette County, I'd walk in and it was in a church and it had a couple of rooms and you'd walk in and you would go to the room that was titled with your precinct. You would go to that precinct and hand you your ballot and you'd vote. So you only had maybe 3 to 4 ballot variations because precincts don't often get cut up, but you only have 3 to 4 ballot variations in a room for voters to get on. So you're not going to get the wrong ballot variation. And I don't know if I like the Jessamine County clerk's idea of just saying, hey, we'll just put printers out there so we can just print the ballots when we need them. That makes me a little bit uncomfortable. And I think we should double think that one. We should keep better track of our paper ballots and get rid of the voting centers. So that way we don't have to worry about stocking 20 ballot variations at every single location and then running out of one, another area running out of another. Instead, we can just put ballots out there where they need to be with the correct variations. And then we don't have to have people running all around to make sure you have the right ballots. Just my humble opinion. But let's talk about Lexington here for a second, because we've got the Fayette County clerk is always surprised when election day pops up. I'm telling you, he is always shocked. Don Blevins is his name, and for as long as he's been doing this, you would think he would know when election day is and be prepared for it. However, without fail, Every year, he messes something up. So outside of the early voting center being in one location for the entire city that has hundreds of different ballot variations, we had an issue on election day. We had a city council race where about 70-ish ballots, they don't know who. There's no way for them to audit this, apparently. But early morning, they realized about 70, 80 votes in that they had been given the wrong ballots with the wrong city council race on it to people that were coming in. And the city council race in question affected had 3 people in it, 2 go on to the primary. The third place person was not in the position by only 20, 30 votes. Very close. So that ballot mix-up of giving the wrong ballot to 70, 80 people threw off the entire election. So that's going to the court now. And what they think will happen is they'll just rerun the election in November with all 3 on the ballot, which seems like an iffy proposal. I don't know how I feel about that, but that's what they're going to do. They're not going to redo a voting on that race. They're just going to say that's what Blevins thinks he's pushing for. And then, of course, we had our issues. Now, we had issues actually in all counties. So it is election law that you are allowed to, quote unquote, electioneer 100 feet from the door on election day. And we had a big issue with the fact that apparently, now this is common in a lot of other areas of Kentucky, Northern Kentucky. They did this on election day. Louisville does this on election day. 2 years ago, Booker and McGrath were having a pizza parties out in the Commonwealth Stadium parking lot. So this is not an uncommon thing, but for some reason, Blevins was unaware that what the law exactly stated, as were a lot of people. We had a lot of people who were obviously against my campaign, spreading a lot of lies that day about how far away from the polls we were. It's 100 feet. And you realize when you go out, and we went out to every polling spot and measured 100 feet. And you realize when you do that and you mark it, how many people aren't aware of what 100 feet is. 100 feet's a lot shorter than they think it is. But we went out, we measured, we marked, we were following the law, but that didn't stop people from trying to make a big deal about us being out there. And voters are welcome to share opinions, I guess, even if they are false. But where it became really concerning was the poll workers. We had a lot of poll worker problems. We had an issue in Garrett County of one polling place. As people walked in, the poll worker was asking them, well, are they a nuisance out there, pointing to our person over 100 feet away, holding their sign and asking if they're a nuisance. Well, that is like saying they're a nuisance. And that obviously affects the vote. And we got reports from a couple of people changing their votes because of it. And now, do I think those people were? I don't know. It's hard to claim. It's hard to know, right? Because you'd like to think a person holding a sign 100 feet away from the polls wouldn't flip a vote, but people are weird. But anyways, but on top of that, we had, though, more important issues, worse issues going on. We had a polling location where we had a poll worker call the sheriff on our person out there 3 times. We had in other polling locations we completely abandoned that we were working at because the poll workers came out and started making such a scene and yelling about everything, despite the fact we're in the right. How in the right were we? Well, the Fayette County Clerk Blevins, he called me up at about 8:30. I was outside of a polling place and said, you need to pull your people back off the property. And if you continue to be where you're at, I'm going to arrest everybody, including you. He told me, he called me up on election day and threatened me with arrest for what I was doing. And so, not to be, you know how I am, I'm not gonna go take that laying down. So we went toe to toe with him, and we went ahead and we got a restraining order on Blevins that day. We had about 130 in our hands. Of course, the damage had already been done. It already ran off a lot of people. We had an issue at a voting place. This was this person's voting place, young lady, about 20 years old. This was her voting place, her precinct. She was going to vote that day. But the poll workers created such an issue and calling the police and everything else and made it so caustic and was attacking her, saying the vilest things to them, that they ended up leaving and not voting because they were scared off the property by the poll workers. We had other people going in to vote and poll workers saying, I don't have to guess who you're going to vote for at that ugly yard with the Cooperrider sign in it. It was ridiculous. And there's no repercussions for this. But even outside of that, we had to sue Blevins, and it was granted. We got a restraining order against him saying we're in the right and he was in the wrong. We got that at 1:30. However, that still did not stop the poll workers and their behavior. And what do you expect? There's no repercussions for it. Nothing happens to them. They get no trouble at all when they go ahead and decide they're going to engage in electioneering themselves, because that's what they're doing. When you're wrongly asserting that we are somehow violating the law loudly and to voters too as they walk in, which that occurred several times, you're engaging in electioneering and you're changing the outcome of it in a way you're not supposed to. But there is no repercussions for them to do that. There's no problems with them doing that. It's considered A-okay, I guess. All you can do is report them and hope that they don't work in November. And that's it. There's nothing else. So, and I don't know if they're poorly trained or what. What I'd love to see is at 100 feet away, there's a sign that goes up that says no electioneering beyond this point. Also, too, there was issues in Jessamine County where the school board had decided there was no electioneering on their property. So on election day, they're kicking their people off. Well, that's a problem because voting centers arguably become public property the day up. For an example, if a voting center is at a church and it's where I need to vote, and I've priorly been, let's say you are just an awful person, you've been trespassed off that church, meaning you can't step back foot on the property of that church. If that's where you're voting that day, you're allowed to show up and vote still. It's still considered public property for the day. And so we had some issues with a church or two trying to claim we can't be there. So we had to move our people off there, but also school boards out in Jessamine County saying, well, these people need to be removed off the property there. They're not allowed on the property because the school board says so. Well, it's not up to the school board on voting day. They have surrendered their property over to be a conducted voting center. It is their decision. And so it appears that these county clerks and they just don't know. They're not, I don't know if it's, well, Blevins clearly. But, it is clear that election law is just not being followed across the state. And then people are interpreting it and then saying whatever they feel like saying as poll workers inside the polling places. And that is wrong. It's a wrong thing to do. You shouldn't be doing it. There should be better repercussions for it, but there's really not. And so that created, I think, a lot of issues on election day. So takeaways: we need signs at 100 feet away so people know how far 100 feet is. We need poll workers be better trained and repercussions for their actions if they engage in electioneering. And we also need to make sure we're getting rid of these voting centers and having a place for people go to vote that is tied to their precinct. I think those improvements will help increase our quote unquote election integrity, because integrity and election integrity is more than just about paper ballot backups and all these things. It's also about ensuring that the behavior, that it is fair coming into the voting box. Everybody's following the same set of rules and nobody's being favored one over the other. I think that's very important. Now, am I going to say that throw off the outcome of my election? Probably not. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to guess. But at the same time, regardless, seeing those kinds of actions, I'm concerned about the elections. Like I was talking about that city council election, that's 20 votes, 30 votes. There was a coroner's race in Jessamine County that was decided on like 20 votes. A countywide race decided on 20 votes. If those are the kind of improprieties they're doing where they're talking bad about a coroner or about a coroner candidate, or they're handing out the wrong ballots to people, like they're handing Democrats a Republican ballot and then they're able to vote, that could change the outcome of an election like that. And I think we need to take a good hard look at it. And I'm not even talking about my election there. I am literally just talking about moving towards a safer outcome that isn't being thrown off by so much human error. So, putting aside election stuff and voting stuff, let's talk about an interesting story. This is a story nobody else is really talking about. I got sent information on this from an internal, I guess, party email that went in on Franklin County Republican Party. A person emailed everybody else in the party kind of relaying this, and it's been verified through a few different people. So the city of Frankfort hires a PI to harass Republican Party members of the county. Let me explain this. Okay, so there is this situation regarding this city commissioner former city commissioner, I guess, Kyle Thompson in Frankfort. And so what happened with Kyle Thompson? Well, Kyle Thompson was a part of a board, a panel that was interviewing for a new police chief. And a woman was interviewing for the position in the group. And during the interview, he sent, I guess, some text messages to a person, to a private citizen, about the candidate. And it wasn't about the candidate in the sense of inappropriate, in the sense of saying like, oh man, she's so attractive or whatever. That's not it. He was texted the citizen, and the news is leery to report the text message because it's apparently it's maybe a little lewd. But the gist of it is he said that he didn't want to hire her because she had a lot of relations with other officers in the department. And he defends that. He doesn't. What he said was, he came out and he said, how I said it was wrong. And yes, I could see it as derogatory. However, the content of what I said is 100% accurate. And I'm willing to go down fighting to prove it. And I'm willing to call witnesses and all kinds of affidavits to prove that my content of why I didn't want to hire her, because she had too many inappropriate relationships, in his opinion, inappropriate relationships with other officers on the force, he was willing to prove. So the issue, so he didn't make a statement about, lewd and crude in the sense of saying, oh, she's so whatever. His lewd and crude statements were about her sexual proclivities with other people on the force. And so the city commission launches an investigation into this. Now, while this was going on, he attended the meeting, the party meeting for Franklin County, and it was the January monthly meeting, and he briefly spoke to the organization, and he gave a brief he gave a brief update on his public controversy, and that's pretty much it. Nothing much beyond that, right? Well, the first reports we get is on Tuesday, March 8th, a member that was at this party, a member of the executive, or I guess an at-large member of the party, came home from the meeting or a meeting on March 8th, and found a Post-it note with a business card on the front door. The note requested that this individual call an investigator for a law firm in Louisville. So this person calls him, and they finally the investigator admits that they're working for a law firm that was representing the Frankfort city government and wanted information on what was said in the meeting. So this is what happened. So the city commission hires an outside law firm, which I wonder, and somebody can, I don't want to upset anybody, but as I say this, understand why I'm asking this. What does the city attorney and county attorney do? So almost every city has a city attorney. I actually haven't seen it. And every county has a county attorney. It's actually a put in their position. Every county has a county attorney. I believe they are elected too, in every county. And so, why do we have a elected position in Kentucky, in all counties? Every 4 years, they're elected, and their title is county attorney, but yet we continue to have to hire these outside law firms to do these things. What? I just don't understand. Like, if there's ever a time to use the county attorney who's elected, accountable to the people, it's when they're investigating another elected person to decide whether or not they're going to remove this guy from office, something they ended up doing. They ended up voting to remove him from office. I believe it is still in the courts right now to decide It's still in the courts to decide how they're going to handle this, or if he is, if he's to be removed or not. They voted and removed him. And so it's still in the courts. But they hire an outside law firm who hires a private investigator who wants to find out what was said at this party meeting. Okay. And so the investigator, and this gets really odd because remember, this is a political party meeting. So it's a First Amendment issue when you have government tax dollars investigating a political party's meeting. To make it even more interesting, the gentleman here being removed, Kyle Thompson, it appears he is the only, that I could see upon quick investigation, the only elected Republican in the city, in the county, as far as holding a county position or a city position. He's the only elected Republican. And so he's being investigated, and they're sending down private investigators to investigate a party meeting. Okay. Kind of odd, but it gets even stranger. So the mayor's warned, and a couple of people are warned, and it starts turning out that there's more and more people visited. So this individual says, as of March 18th, 14 members of the Franklin County Republican Party had received home visits from the investigator representing the city of Frankfort. Another member, one of these members, was visited on March 6th. She was then visited twice on March 15th. She had told the agent she did not want to get involved, but the investigator ignored her request. So now we're harassing GOP members of the local party to investigate party ongoings, political speech. And people are saying, look, I don't want to be bothered by this. And they're using taxpayer funds to pay for this private investigator. So this investigator ignores the request. And then on March 17th, one of the members was subpoenaed for the hearing. They received a phone call from the lead attorney for the city of Frankfort. And then apparently this attorney asked this member a leading question of if he had heard any complaints of intimidation about the investigator. So the attorney had asked, knew that because they were bringing, the party members are bringing this up to the mayor and to the thing, like, guys, we're being intimidated by this investigator. And this individual said yes to the attorney and said, anytime an individual representing a government entity comes to my property uninvited, it is intimidating and invasion of privacy. He says this. Then the subpoena was canceled after that conversation. The mayor was warned about this and reported he was concerned about the home visits, visiting people in their homes because of their involvement in a party meeting, spending taxpayer dollars, harassing. But while he's concerned about this, the visits continued for another 7 days beyond that. Now, am I here to say that, Kyle Thompson should be or shouldn't be removed from city commission for his behavior? That is not, it's not my county. It's not for me to judge. I think that's up to the voters to kind of decide how they're going to respond to that. However, I do believe that it is an extreme violation to take these people's taxpayer dollars, hire an outside law firm that then hires a private investigator to harass the members of the county party because of their attendance in a party meeting. You are stepping on some very, very iffy grounds there if you're doing that as a city. And I think it deserves further investigation. So I hope somebody picks this up and runs with it. It sucks that my podcast has to be the first one to really even talk about this, but that seems like an extreme abuse of power and funds, and we need to handle it. So moving on here to our next topic here, we're going to talk about the dreaded monkeypox. Okay, monkeypox. So Joe Biden said just the other day that you should be really, really concerned about monkeypox. And so I said, oh my goodness, here we go again. So I start searching and I say, how does this monkeypox spread, and it spreads through fluids being, if you've got open sores on like bed sheets, and it also spreads through prolonged face-to-face contact. Sounds like making out. And then I get to it and I find out that as I'm reading through it, monkeypox mostly spreads, according to the news reports that I was reading, through sexual contact, which I think adds a whole new level of slow the spread to me. Because at least they're not asking, well, they'll be asking us to close our businesses if we can't flatten the curve and stop the spread. And I'm not trying to laugh. Okay, this is very serious, but it is funny. It is funny. And if you don't believe me, check out this headline here. Monkeypox likely spread by sex at 2 raves in Europe, expert says. This is from the Associated Press reporting this one right here. It says that Dr. David Hyman, who formerly headed WHO's emergencies department, said the leading theory was sexual transmission among gay and bisexual men at 2 raves held in Spain and Belgium was the most likely spread of the monkeypox in Europe. So it would appear, as long as we can contain ourselves from going to raves and orgies, we should be okay and make it through this one. Just goes to show, once again, being in a monogamous relationship is probably the correct decision for most people. Now, look, I understand, not everybody's a Christian conservative like me, and not everybody's married like me, and I hear you there. But if ever there was a time to look at your life decisions and maybe decide if you should take a different path, this might be it. It might finally be time to stop before you head out to your local orgy. Before you head out to your local orgy and ask yourself, do I want to get monkeypox today? Because that is apparently the chief vector. Now, look, the timing's very suspicious. If you go back and you Google monkeypox and you set your parameters to like over 6 months ago, you'll start to see the CDC and everybody else is buying the treatments for this in millions of dollars worth in quantities well before Joe Biden was telling us all to be concerned about it, which begs some questions. And obviously the timing's a little suspect, as it seems to be just in time and it's ramping up for the November elections. Though, as long as you're casting your ballot on paper and not making out with one another, strangers in line, and engaging apparently in sexual proclivities, you should be okay to vote. So if they try to claim that this monkeypox is the reason why we need mail-in balloting in November, you need to be asking this question: what is going on at our polling stations that is of concern? Now, look, this new variant may spread. I don't know. Maybe it spreads through a lot of different ways. But as of right now, you saw the article. Look, that article came out 8 hours ago from the time I was recording this. So that's a pretty recent article. And so unless there's been a vast change, it would appear that the best decision in life is to remain through your normal life as long as it doesn't involve sexual misconduct. And I think that's important, because as they're trying to scare the bejeebus out of everybody, I think that is definitely worth discussing and making sure people understand how it transmits and what the vectors are for transmitting. Well, I thank you guys for joining me. This is the end of the podcast. Feel free to catch us next week, Tuesday. Video goes live at noon, and podcast gets posted Tuesday morning. Thank you guys so much for joining us. And remember, like, comment, share, subscribe, and let's keep pushing. Let's move the liberty movement forward.